Hey, good evening. I'm back with another round of Raimes mailbag. Tonight is a little bit stranger, I think, because I was actually requested that I talk about my mental health volunteer life. And while it's basically, it was like, what was it like? Would you mind talking about it? And so it's not really so much a question, I feel, more like a request. So I decided to answer it anyways. It's going to be a little bit of a lengthier one and stuff. But yeah, we can go ahead and discuss it. So for a while, I was volunteering to help with suicide prevention and stuff. My town was very much so horribly understaffed, did not have any sort of good methods whatsoever. If you wanted any sort of response, you would literally have to go and move to like a bigger city because those smaller outer towns in the rural areas just really didn't have shit for services. So this was literally me coming off of the horror show that was my mental health life over at my previous clinic, and I was sitting down one day and I was thinking to myself about like all the problems that it had had and all of the problems that I had had going in trying to get services and stuff and trying to preserve myself. And so over the course of time I kind of generated this understanding of its inherent flaws and what needed to be done and things like that. And I would sit down, I would listen to the community a lot because I would be the member of like a lot of chats and stuff, and like those chats would like talk about discrepancies with the mental health care systems that we have down here, as well as the hospital systems, and then problems with police and everything else. And it was just really one of those things. And so I think going into it, I had a pretty firm grip on what I wanted to do. A friend of mine had literally signed me up as a volunteer because he felt that I had the demeanor for it and stuff. And so every night I would literally go and volunteer my time and my effort to going and having calls routed to me. And I would talk to people that were suicidal all the time. I would literally hear all kinds of things. Like I heard all sorts of problems as my time went on and stuff, and I would just sit there and I would listen. I wouldn't judge people. I wouldn't sit there and say, hey, it's going to get better, because in all reality, I don't know if it's going to get better or not. Like, I think deep down I would secretly hope that it would get better, but I wouldn't really actually know because it's impossible for me to know, I feel. So I would sit down and I would listen to people. Some things, it was really simple, like breakups and stuff. Other things, it was like much more severe, like people's entire lives had been kind of falling down. They'd been collapsing and stuff. And I had, as time had gone on, I had become very, very good at mitigating suicide. I have a very good success rate. I literally have a 0% failure rate, more or less. Like, I have no failure rate during my entire time. And so I consider myself really lucky in this regard. I would get some people that would call in and they would be so strung out, so depressed, and kind of on their last leg, and I would have to literally sit there and distract them a lot of the time because a lot of them are like, I'm just kind of sick of being alive, more or less. And I'm kind of ready to end it and stuff. And I would literally be like, hey man, I'm sorry that you're going through that and it's really, really rough. What can I do for you? And some people were really reasonable about it. They were like, hey, can I get to a hospital? And so a lot of the time, I'd arrange for it to happen. And then others would be like, you can't fix my life. Which, to be fair, they're right and stuff. And I would have to literally keep talking to them. And, I would, in many ways, just kind of have to keep going with the conversation to de escalate things. And then I would have to literally go and just listen a lot, like when you're dealing with people that are in crisis and stuff and, thinking about ending themselves. I find that you have to handle it in a very sensitive fashion. You have to be able to read tones. There's just all sorts of things, you have to be very, very careful with it because you have human souls in your hand, more or less. And so I had gotten really, really good at it. and I just kind of continued rolling with it and stuff. It eventually had expanded out to another program that a friend of mine had started up, because he went ahead and he started his own medical business, and it was catering towards those that were mentally ill and needed de-escalation, more or less. So we kind of had to sit there and address a couple of the issues when it came down to going and getting people to hospitals, more or less. We realized that we didn't really want to go and have cops over at their residency for a lot of these people, because cops have a tendency to make things worse. They're really not mentally equipped to go and deal with people that are going through crises and stuff, and it just wasn't, when you're going and you're having a full-scale mental collapse, a cop going and pointing their gun at you is really just not the best. His wife had decided to come on board because she's a nurse who's like really, really good with these sorts of things. And so what would happen is, in his off time, in my off time, and her off time, we would go and volunteer our time to taking calls, and if the person needed to get to a hospital, he would go and pick them up with his wife to get them to where they needed to be. And then while I was on the phone, I would typically go and de-escalate. And so this solution worked. It still works. It's actually getting bigger. It's becoming a more widely adopted solution. And so as time had gone on, this was pretty much not so much a hobby, but it's what I did in my pastime a lot. I would listen to people and I would try to help them through their grievances and stuff. I wasn't really comfortable giving advice and stuff, because the problem with advice is it's very subjective. It may work for you, but it may not work for them. So I had deemed right off the bat that it was just really the best policy to keep your mouth shut, and occasionally ask, hey, what can I do for you? Do you need this? Do you need that? But under no circumstance was I to ever give advice. And so this proved to be very, very successful. There was a lot of frustrations, I think, that came with it, because sometimes I would go and ride with them, or sometimes they would go and they would be like, hey, we're just going to take them up ourselves. And so getting patients to hospitals was actually really, really rough. We would have to show up to the ER a lot of the time, and the thing with ERs is they just really don't like to do their job. They don't really like to admit people. Like, the medical in this fucking country is just god-awful. And so when you would go in a lot of the time, the wait time was like really, really bad. A lot of the time I would go in, I would sit with them and stuff, and I would just kind of keep talking with them, and because a lot of these people are just so damn stressed, like they just have too much going on. And a lot of the time I find that they will actually calm down a fair bit if they know that somebody is there with them, kind of like rooting for them and stuff. They just want somebody to be there with them, which, is perfectly fine and stuff. And so I would sit and I would wait, and then a lot of the time, they would be like, hey, can you come back with me? And I'd be like, yeah, not a problem. Getting them admitted is a fucking nightmare, per se. Quite a few people that we've had to go and help were literally people that were in need of like meds, or people suffering from just really insanely bad bouts of suicidality and suicidal ideation and stuff. And so I would have to go in and explain to them, be like, hey, this is what we have going on. This person needs to be monitored for a bit. They possibly may need meds. Can we get a hand, please? And so the hospital that we were taking them to, because my town only had one, well, continues to only have one, was so fucking bad at the time that what they would do is they would kind of look at him and they would make off-bank comments like, well, they don't look like they're suicidal enough. And I always just I remember just kind of sitting there one night and hearing that, and like I'm literally just kind of sitting in this chair while they go and they have this physician from some other country go and talk over an iPad, to the patient and stuff, and it's very evident that the patient is clocked out. They're not really doing good, they're not really responsive and stuff. And I found out very, very quickly that a lot of doctors just didn't really have any sort of regard for patients whatsoever, because I would take very long notes and I would explain what's going on. Hello, this is X, Y, and Z. They're dealing with X, Y, and Z. This is what the conversation, pertained to. Can we have them admitted, please? Because quite frankly, I really don't want them to die. And so a lot of the time I found that I had to spend a good chunk of time fighting with people. It's not something that I really ever wanted to do, but I felt like, a lot of these people, if the person next to them does not speak up and push for it, a lot of the time the hospitals would literally just go and turn them away, because a lot of them just don't really know how to handle mental health at all. So I'd have to go and I would have to get really, really fucked up with people to get them to be admitted. And so it was really just kind of a thing. Now, the person would normally be admitted. They would be doing better over a course of 72-hour holding, and then, they would go home. Life would go on, and, that was pretty much it. Or sometimes they would be held for a lot longer and then be sent to outpatient services, more or less, for long-term psychiatric care and stuff, especially if they were put on meds. And so the results have always been pretty good, but it's getting towards that result that is always really, really bad. Whenever I would go and drop them off or accompany them to hospitals with the others, more or less, I would have to go and fight with the staff a lot of the time. I had started losing respect for a lot of nurses around this time, because they would go and in the hallway while we were sitting in the rooms, they would go and make jokes about people's mental health and stuff, and I didn't really care for it too much. I felt that it was already aggravating a problem in the extreme by doing so, and then by continuing to do so, it was only making it worse, so I just really never really cared for it. A lot of the doctors are really apathetic and stuff, and I always thought that it was really, really stupid that they would just try to stare at them and, based off of what they saw, dictate whether or not they felt that they were suicidal enough to be admitted. And the thing is when I notice that a human being is shutting down, it's not a good sign ever, so I would have to go and argue with these people, and I felt that it was worth it. I still do to a great extent, but I just didn't really like trying to work, I guess, around people that just didn't really give a shit about much of anything. And then you have apathetic nurses that just think that everything is a joke and stuff, and it just really was awful. Once we would get them up to the 4th floor, it would be a lot better, because the staff on the 4th floor of the hospital that we would take them to would always treat everybody really, really well. There's actually good people that work on the 4th floor. Management leaves a lot to be desired, but the basic technicians and orderlies and stuff and everybody else that works up there are actually really, really kind. They're really, really good people, and they do way too much than what they should have to do to go above and beyond, for their patients and stuff. So I had done this for a while, and I continue to be good at it. I don't really do it so much myself anymore, because I'm too exhausted to be functional a lot of the time with my health issues and stuff, but I can 100% without a doubt say that it was worth it listening to people, no matter what the problem was, talking them down, getting things de-escalated, and getting them to where they needed to be. And I was completely and utterly disgusted by pretty much almost every staff member that I had to work with to get people to a better place. So we pretty much came to the conclusion, past a certain point, that the system works. My friend and his wife turned it into a business, and they expanded out, and they continue to provide rapid crisis response to pretty much anybody that needs it. There's no stress of having police officers or anything like that. There's no stress of anybody getting shot or people being undertrained. And so the company in general, has just kind of grown, and things have gotten better. The end result is that suicides have gone down, and that there's people that are actually going and checking into services and stuff and taking care of themselves. Is just kind of building a better community. So when I had I had eventually kind of moved on from it. It wasn't good, it wasn't bad, it's just, it wasn't really where I wanted to be. It's like, yes, it was great that I was good at it and stuff, but I kind of felt that I wanted to do other things. And with me having like my own issues and stuff, I didn't really see myself having any term or any sort of long-term viability. Because what happens is, as you go and try to take care of people and stuff, you kind of become a trauma holder in your own right. I view this to be the same thing with therapists and everything else, because you go and you hear these horror stories and you know how bad everything is, and you kind of just sit there and say to yourself, God damn, this shit's really fucked up, and it kind of haunts you at night. So I'm really proud of like the work that I got to do over there and stuff, even though I was like a volunteer. But I didn't really see myself having sustainability, like I said. So I would eventually continue to work in the community a fair bit. This is what I do still to this day. And that is, I volunteer my time and effort to help people transition from failing clinics to therapists, either new or old, that they would like to do continuity of care with. And so my clinic handled my transfer very fucking awfully. My therapist had, left for her own reasons and stuff. I was told that I had, I think it was like 7 sessions left. She was gone after 3. Nobody told me. No phone call, no nothing. I had to literally shackle together a system for myself, because normally what's supposed to happen is you spend a couple of months winding down, essentially, and figuring out continuity of care. There was other things that had plagued it as well, like the clinic at the time had a death grip on everybody, and I found out later that they would always discourage therapists taking patients with them, because obviously it's bad for business, but at the same time, if I was going and sitting in the room, and I remember my session very clearly. We were getting ready to end, actually. It was like the last 10 minutes. I was doing, I think at the time, 1.5-hour stints, And what was going on, essentially, was she kind of squeezed in last minute, oh, I've been doing this a while. I am going to be leaving the clinic. This, is just kind of how this is, X, Y, and Z. So, when I was given my options and stuff, there was no, oh hey, you can do continuity of care with me, because the clinic discouraged that, which I feel is not in the best interest of the patient, well, anybody really. And so I was presented with, you can either stop therapy, see another therapist, or go to another clinic. And I was like, Jesus Christ. So I had to kind of shackle together my own systems, and this led to inevitable conversations like, okay, are you going to go ahead and take my insurance? And she was like, yes. And so it kind of became this very intense waiting game past a certain point, and a lot of it was me kind of bobbing in and out of the hospital and stuff, trying to care for myself more or less. And because I wasn't, at the time I wasn't really in the best place. I mean, my mental health kind of comes and goes and stuff. But the process was so damn bad that it had left a lasting mark on me. And yes, I managed to go and get continuity of care with my therapist and stuff. But the point that I'm making is it should have never been that bad right out the gate. Like if a therapist is leaving and stuff, and she wants to offer continuity of care for her patients, she should be, well, he, she, whoever should be allowed to do so. So I didn't really like that too much, the whole idea of, this is our clinic, these are our patients, you're just a worker here, we more or less own these patients, and I just didn't really like that line of thinking too much. So my clinic has been experiencing a full collapse for a while. They hemorrhaged a shit ton of therapists. It left a bunch of patients displaced, more or less, and it wasn't really that great. It led to a lot of suffering. None of the proper methods that the American Psychology Association have in place were really kept, like people were let go of extremely short notice, or in my case, I was told that there would be X amount of sessions to work through it and stuff, and then, 2 or 3 sessions later, boom, they're gone. it was just really, really awful in that regard. It was a very rocky experience. And I mean, I'm grateful that I'm still here, don't get me wrong, but it could have gone south very, very quickly with the sensitive nature that mental health is, well, therapy in general can be. So I realized I wasn't really satisfied with it, like at all. And so I had started taking it upon myself to literally go and help people transition, because what would happen is the clinic was collapsing, a lot of therapists were leaving, and then the actual process was so damn bad that it was not functional. So I said to myself, okay, is continuity of care okay? And then I found out later, oh, it is. So what I would actually do is there was like a huge Discord server that basically catered to most of the mentally ill folks in my town. And they'd be like, well, where do we go from here? We've more or less been abandoned, we've more or less have been dumped, and so a lot of people are like, well, do we start off a new therapist? A lot of people didn't really want to do it. They were like, I don't want to take this journey again because I've been doing it for so long, and I feel like if I start fresh somewhere else, I'm going to have to rehash everything, and it just sucks. Reasonable. And then others were like, the experience is so damn bad that I don't really want to pursue mental health at all, and, a lot of these were folks that needed, like, routine meds and stuff to be at their best, and, it's, like, again, understandable. And so there was a friend of mine, how this whole shit of a mess had started is, there was a friend of mine who was a rather intensive case, and the clinic had collapsed, had dumped her therapist, and then her therapist wound up going and starting her own business and stuff, opened up her own clinic, and she had really bad social anxiety. And so what had happened was she was like, oh, my therapist has a clinic now, and I would like to go and do continuity of care, but I don't know if it's okay, which, it is. And so how we solved the issue is we had gotten in a group call. I had called and had her on the line, and we had both called her therapist together, and I was like, hello, Mrs. So-and-so, my friend here would like to know if she can pursue continuity of care with you. Are you okay with this? And if so, do you accept her insurance, or, how are you doing your finances? And so what happened with that entire meeting was it was a rolling success. And she had hooked back up with her old therapist, and she had got her, insurance squared away and stuff, and she had continuity of care. There was a lot of pitfalls with this that I had learned to later address, and that was, okay, how do we go about getting medical records? Because the clinic that collapsed, getting medical records from them was fucking awful. Like, the staff would question you very, very harshly at times on where you were going, who you were seeing, why you were leaving, like all this other stuff, and it was really, really, like, truly fucking awful, more or less, because in all reality, it's just really none of their fucking business. If a patient would like to go and pursue continuity of care, they're legally allowed to do so. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not like, the other person's scalping patients. It's just the clinic's collapsing because everything's a fucking shit show. People are leaving, obviously. And as a patient, you legally cannot lock down their medical records. You can't tell them that they're not allowed to go anywhere else. So throughout the entire process of this, I had learned a lot about law in this regard, in terms of like what people can do, what they can't do, things like that. So it had gotten to a point where we had started requesting her medical records, and finally I was like, hey, listen, according to, Arizona state law, you have to provide it. It's not an option for you. So it went from them not wanting to provide it to them being incredibly difficult about it, and so some records would show up like 4 weeks later, and I found that it had stifled the entire process because a lot of these people had wanted to migrate, and the entire process was way more painful than what it needed to be. And so it was a lot of unneeded suffering for the sake of greed. It was very much so the mentality of, oh, if we cannot have these people, other people cannot have these people. And I really fucking hate that about the medical industry. The mental health industry, I think, in general, does it the worst, you know, in terms of like how much of a fucking asshole they can be about things sometimes. But we eventually had gotten her medical records transferred over, and she was able to start her therapeutic life, and now she's actually doing really, really well. I had to take the same approach to my therapeutic life, except mine was way more haphazard and a hell of a lot uglier, and it really just was not going over too well. I mean, yes, I did survive it, but it was a hell of a lot uglier than what it had to be. So, from there, we had announced in the group the method that was used to transfer, you know, people over and stuff. And so, at this point, other people were asking for help. They were like, we too would like continuity of care. How do we go about doing it? And so sometimes I would hop in like a video call and be like, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And so the process had become incredibly simple, I think. What would happen is a lot of these therapists would literally just stay in the area. Some of them would leave. And it would revolve around trying to find them, and then me going and saying, okay, you know, do you want to continue with this person? The patient would say yes. You know, we would conclude the meeting. I would reach out on their behalf and be like, hey, I've got, you know, this patient that would like to go and continue care with you. Are you okay with this? If so, may they call you to set things up? You know, do you accept, you know, X insurance still, and, you know, the whole 9 yards. And so this had become the method of operation for like a really long time, and it is incredibly successful. Mental health clinics hate this shit. They were not a fan with anybody helping, you know, other people and stuff. And I get it, they're trying to maintain some level of viability, but to be fair, if the clinic was great, shit like this wouldn't be happening. They wouldn't be hemorrhaging people, they wouldn't have an insane turnover rate. It's just shit would not be like this. And so the process would just be people getting a hold of me doing phone calls, helping them get their records set up, and then them starting off their new existence with continuity of care and everything like that. And it works. It is amazingly successful for what it is. And so this has been going on for a while. Then there were some people that were striking out on their own, much like my therapist. There was like a huge ass gap in time with waiting because they would want to get certain insurances, especially state-sponsored insurances like Access, certified, more or less, you know, for the various assignments that they have for Medicare and Medicaid. And so what would happen is I would eventually start expanding out. And so I am legally blind. My computer monitor is literally a huge-ass television because it allows me to make text big enough to go and actually read and understand and things like that. And so things had kind of expanded out. The clinic had continued hemorrhaging people left and right. And so this kind of left people in a vacuum, more or less. And it wasn't really that great because on one end, they can't stay at the clinic because the provider is no longer there and they want to do continuity of care. But on the other end, we have the provider striking out on their own, you know, and like starting their own business and stuff to work under their terms. That way they're not working under a veritable shit show anymore. And so from the time they leave up to the time that they can get insurance squared away, as well as get everything else set up, it was in between 5 to 8 months. And so for some of these people, a lot of the time they didn't really have all of that time to sit there and just wait endlessly without speaking to somebody. Some people, like moi, need constant care. And while it's not great or glamorous, sometimes it is a very ugly fact of life, you know, that people just go and need constant care, and to be fair, I think they deserve to be cared for. So what I would do is we would wait for their provider to get it together, and then for that time in between, what I would do is I would either invite them, to a location, carry a laptop that I could read with me, or sometimes I would invite them over if they were in my neighborhood, and I would listen to their discrepancies, take notes on their mental state, things like that. And I would literally, every time they had come over, I would go and do notes. And so most people at the time were visiting me like once a week. And I would just be like, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and help you decompress. That way we can keep you mentally stable. And we're going to pretty much do what we need to do until you can start with continuity of care with your old provider. And so I have been doing this for like a long time as well. And I've been offloading the last while because people are finally starting to get hooked up to their old therapists and stuff, and I am kind of outliving, I guess, my usefulness because things are finally starting to stabilize, which again is fine, nothing ever lasts forever. And so it's been kind of a hell of a thing because it's been a lot of sitting down, listening, tons of life stories. Oh my fucking god. Lots and lots of life stories. I find that everybody's unique, like everybody has really interesting circumstances and stuff, and I realized how many people are in pain out there. So for the last while, what I've been kind of doing in my off time is listening to people, taking notes, helping them get hooked up with their old providers, and then eventually they graduate from needing my assistance during the transitionary period. They're given all of their notes, they're stapled, and then they're sent over with them, and, they go and they start therapy. I don't provide advice really, because I continue that habit, again, I find advice is incredibly subjective. What may work for me most likely will not work for them because everybody's different. And I would just literally just let them decompress. And what this would allow them to do is basically stay stable until way more capable hands would be able to take them from me, more or less. So I also adopted a different approach, I think, to dealing with people, and it has proven to be very, very successful. A lot of people, especially most modern therapists, they have this certain weird-ass level of detachment. Detachment itself is not the issue. It's when it's so detached that it becomes cold, like super cold, like almost to the point of unfeeling. And I noticed that was one of the inherent issues, I think, currently in mental health, with the way that people go through other people so much. Eventually they start breeding insane amounts of apathy and a large amount of insensitivity. So what I would do is, a lot of the time when I would have somebody come over, I would give them my undivided attention, and I would just listen, and I would just talk to them. There would be no, psychobabble, so to speak, out of, whatever the hell course they took or anything like that. I would just literally sit them down and talk to them like a human being, and I'd be like, hey man, tell you what, that sucks, Sometimes we would sit down and have tea, it just, when you go and you have people that are already struggling, they really don't need to be introduced to a cold and a callous environment. I see it a lot in mental health. I also see it a hell of a lot in hospitals. It becomes cold and callous to the point of unfeeling, and when you have people that are kind of going through it, they go through hell on a regular basis, they don't want to deal with a robot. Like, if you're frigid, chances are you probably should not be doing this to begin with. So I pretty much treated every single session with an insane amount of warmth. And I would be like, hey man, what's up? I wouldn't be all super formal and shit about it, because at the end of the day, most people that are going and getting mental health are quite literally just an everyman, more or less, an everyman and every woman. These are not people that, want to start off each and every session in a cold, unfeeling environment. They just want to know that somebody's there. Some people just need to scream into the void, And so during the transitionary periods that they would have, I would literally go and I would sit down and I would be like, hey, what's up? How you doing? And when you introduce the human element like that, they open up to you a lot more. You build rapport a lot faster, and it's just overall better. I've had zero complaints, You know, I have some people that pop up like a year and a couple months later, and they were like, why don't you move into mental health? You're really good with it. Why don't you go and get a degree in it? And so the last while I kind of considered it, I was like, maybe I should. I very quickly realized that it's not for me. Because I find that a lot of people these days, I don't want to be a member of an industry like that, I don't think. I see how a lot of providers talk about their patients when they feel that nobody is looking. And I would experience this at my clinic a lot, especially if they thought that, you know, they were like completely alone and stuff. The walls in the building were just so fucking paper thin. Oh, Jesus Christ. You know, they would have me wait in back rooms and stuff, and you could just hear these people talking a lot of the time. And when people would suggest me working in mental health, I would literally sit there and say to myself, you know, is this what people become, more or less, when they start working in this industry? If it is, I want nothing to do with it. And so it really just kind of, I feel that the industry, to a certain lesser extent, is predatory. You do have a lot of mental health practitioners out there that go and they want the best for their patients, but there's also, considering mental health is kind of a booming industry these days, there's also a lot of people that go and get involved in mental health thinking that it's very easy money, when in reality it is a lot of work. You know, like my entire time doing this, it's been a lot of note-taking, listening, nodding, you know, just going and hearing people and, you know, listening to horror stories, and then going and printing out notes and sometimes records on top of it, especially if, you know, the therapist that they were migrating to had no real way to digitize records. They would get a fat ass stack of paper, and then that had additional costs on top of it, you know, like ink and paper and things like that, and then additional time, you know, and then there was also the investment of a printer on top of it, because some people would be like, you know, hey, I got my records like this. And so there was a certain point in time where I actually went and for the clinics that wanted digital records, I would just scan the records, put it in a PDF format, and have them take it with them on like a CD or something, or like if they had a thumb drive, I would have it loaded on that as well. And then for those that had digital records that wanted them printed, I also offered that as well. You know, but it can get rather expensive. I mean, I use a high yield ink cartridge which spits out about 1,500 pages, and I was burning through it pretty fast, and it adds up. I mean, it's like $109 a piece, you know, and it's like, damn, son. So this is what it takes, more or less, to keep people stable when traditional systems fail. You know, like I find a lot of transitions, the reason why they're complete and utter failures is because they're done in very, very haphazard fashions. You know, the provider will just randomly leave because either their contract is up, or maybe the working conditions are so bad that they just can't stomach it. Fair. But at the same time, there is no wind down period with a lot of clinics. You know, they kind of struggle to go and get somebody hooked up to a new therapist, or continuity of care is just never offered. And it's actually a proven fact that with continuity of care, it actually results in better outcomes. A lot of patients feel that, you know, they go and the entire experience of just unhooking and rehooking is a very jarring one, which, to be fair, is, well, they're not wrong, you know? But I find that for an industry that goes and it basically is meant to go and help alleviate people from their illnesses and their stresses and stuff with like therapy and meds and things like that, I find that the industry in general generates more stress than what it fixes. You know, it's high stress on its workers and stuff, and then patients, I feel, suffer the hardest. You know, very close second with workers, you know. So I had gotten kind of sick of it, but the cool thing about it is when you kind of get sick of seeing it, other people take notice as well, especially when you sit down and talk about it. So I'm not the only one that does this now. There's other people that also help people in the transitionary period as well, and we kind of have a small model established on how it should be done, where it's like, you go, you reach out, and then you get the feedback and you go from there. I haven't had any failures, per se, using this system. I think I had one provider that said no, but she had like a really, really bad, like super violent experience with the patient that was requesting it. So at that point, I was like, okay, sometimes you have to lie about it, and it's really, really shitty, but sometimes you have to do it for the sake of safety. And so what would happen is they'd be like, I'd like to see my therapist again, and then they just wouldn't be having it, because of like whatever the hell happened. And I would have to sit there and say, listen, I know you want to see them, but I would normally come up with either like, hey, they're not going to accept your insurance, or sometimes I would sit there and say, hey, they're getting ready to move, or, well, there was one case where she was getting ready to move. Or sometimes I would just, if I was dealing with a child and their guardian, I would have to be pretty honest with the parent and be like, hey, listen, your child has done some heinous shit. The therapist in question would not like to see your child back because, it is a risk, more or less. So in many ways, when you're going through the transitionary process and stuff, I found that I had to be a mediator quite a bit, because most of the providers that I would get in touch with were really cool about it. I'd have to say like 97% of them would be like, oh yes, I would absolutely love to have my old patient back, thank you. And we would work through getting everything set up, copying records, old notes, things like that, things that you have to have more or less for continuity of care. And then there were others that were like, I either had like a really bad experience, or this, particular patient is stalking me, I'm not comfortable with it, and you have to pay attention to that too, I think. It can't just be good for just the patients, it also has to be good for the providers as well. Both sides need to be heard in this regard. So I was very satisfied with the model as it was functioning, because it catered to both sides very, very heavily. And so if it wasn't good for one, it wasn't going to be good for the other. This was the conclusion that I had come to a while back. And so it just works, essentially. I haven't had any super bad issues with it. I haven't really had any bad issues at all. I get the occasional rejection, but I wouldn't really go as far as to call that a bad issue. Especially if a patient is outwardly aggressive or doing some sketchy behavior that they probably shouldn't be doing. So it is long-winded. It's a hell of a fucking question that, request that was made. But yeah, I go and I give a lot of my time for mental health support and stuff, and at the end of the day, I just kind of want to see a certain level of healthy behavior kind of pop out of the community. Like, I did it for a couple of reasons. On one end, it's like my own experience with transitioning and having to fight fucking religiously to go and keep my therapist was actually really, really bad. It was bad enough to where I don't even enjoy talking about it with her, even though there's like a lot to it and stuff. I literally have just kind of swept that shit under the rug because I feel like it's just very disrespectful, and then I don't really like talking about her previous place of employment, although I have a tendency to do it a fair bit because it was just so damn bad that it was almost traumatizing to a certain lesser extent. I did it for a number of reasons. I understand that therapists want to go and find greener pastures, because when they go and do, clinic work, essentially, they're grossly underpaid for what they are. A lot of the time, their hours are not respected whatsoever. They're quite literally overworked, underpaid. They don't really get good benefits at all. Management has a tendency to be a shit show. There is all sorts of reasons why therapists don't really enjoy going and doing clinics anymore, doing clinic work, and I get that. I feel though that clinics are kind of unhealthy for a lot of people, because it doesn't really, like with clinics, they have so much of a corporate drive, I find, that a lot of the time they don't really care about the human beings that work there, or the human beings that are being treated there. They only care about how much profit that they can go and generate, and I view this as inherently harmful to the human condition. It's harmful to workers because it dehumanizes them and treats them like machines that are just meant to be exploited. Worked until they can't do it anymore, until their mental health gives out, which, to be fair, most most therapists also have therapists, because they take wear and tear. Sometimes they'll have colleagues that they go and they consult as well, which, helps with that. And then you also have the patients, which suffer pretty damn hard as well because, the entire experience is jarring. They're forced to literally go and adjust everything. I find that the proper model for trading patients off is not really done anymore. It's no longer it's supposed to be a months-long process to literally wind everything down and get it to where it needs to be. And a lot of the times it's not done like that. It is so abrupt that it creates more damage than anything, and so it has a tendency to leave patients in a vacuum, and so it just doesn't really benefit them at all. So on one end, working there is damaging the hell out of most of the workers and stuff because they're dehumanized, and then when a provider is forced to leave for their own sake, then it goes and it's so abrupt and so chaotic that it damages the patient on top of it. And so this is why I don't really like a lot of hardcore corporate meddling, I guess, in mental health. Like, I feel like the more that mental health becomes profit driven, the more that people try to cash in on it, the worse the problem is going to get. And a lot of people don't really take that into account, and then we also see online therapy, which has been kind of proven to be a complete and utter wash. Like, in-person therapy is shown to be effective. And then over-the-phone therapy is still pretty effective, although not as effective because you can't read things like body language and things like that. Like, you don't really get a good feel. You just have a voice, essentially, which, you can gauge a lot from a voice and stuff, and talking to another human being is always very, very refreshing. But with the internet, there really is no sense of connection, and so, like, you see companies like ID and Cerebrum and BetterHelp and everything else, a lot of therapists kind of flock to it, but because it's an easy way for them to funnel clients if need be, but the quality of care is actually quite bad. So it's very chaotic, it's not very well structured, and then there isn't really, like, when it's just text and stuff, a lot of the time, there's no real sense of connection there because everything is separated too much. There's no voice, you don't even really know who the hell it is you're seeing a lot of the time, like, you may see a vague photo every now and then. It's just not really that great. And then with certain online platforms, they go and prescribe meds and stuff. A lot of people have a tendency to get hurt because a lot of the providers overprescribe. And so it's just, for meds, it's best to do it in person, but I find for therapy, the furthest that it can ever go and realistically should go is literally phone calls and video chat. At least with video chat, you can see the other person, and, there's that sense of dealing with a human being there. Same thing with phone calls and everything else, but with the internet, not so much. When it's just like straight up text chatting, I find that it can be not effective at all, as I've seen with a couple of people that I've had to work with in the past, where they're like, I tried online therapy, it's not the same, which, to their credit, they're right. And so that side of things has been collapsing for a while, and I don't even recommend it to people a lot of the time. Like, I understand why providers use it, but I also understand that it's not good for people, and I can tell by how they behave, the various complaints that they have, things like that. I had one person that she had left the clinic because her therapist had left before we had started the whole mass migration movement. And she had tried out BetterHelp, which had cycled her through, I think it was like 12 different people in about 4 months. And it was incredibly unstable, And so the whole idea with therapy is to give you the ability to help you work through your problems or to let you vent, whatever it is. But you can't really go and have any sort of stability without consistency. Or at least I feel that you can't have any stability without consistency. And so when you're constantly going through providers and stuff, you're not going to have any consistency, you're not going to have any real stability, and then after a while it just becomes a wash. So people are going and, they're paying weekly for these sessions and stuff to try to better themselves and everything else, but, you're swapping off from provider to provider, so no care is really being had. There's no real sense of long-term stability. So as an end result, you don't really make progress. You get with a new provider, you have to start over, and then that provider dips for whatever reason, and then you have to start over with somebody else. Meanwhile, they continuously make money while you do this. And quite frankly, that's not okay. I view it as a form of exploitation, more or less. The company's still making money, you're still doing business, essentially, but the quality of life and the quality of care just isn't there at that point. And so it just kind of stinks like end-stage capitalism, and I just don't really like it. So, but yeah, this is basically what it has been like going and doing frontline support for a while now. I'm going to tell you this right now. If you go and do anything that is frontline, you're going to go through it. It's going to be hard. It's not for the meek or the mild, You're going to struggle a fair bit because you're going to be carrying very heavy loads all the time. It's not easy. You have to have it together to do frontline support. And so you're also going to get a fair bit of scrutiny, especially if you bump into a lot of other people that work in the mental health industry. I know that a lot of therapists that I've had to go and deal with, they're actually fairly hostile to frontline support. A lot of us don't even know why. It wasn't just me that had this experience. It's actually a lot of people. And so a lot of people that work in the clinical setting, therapists, case managers, things like that, they don't really view us as essential workers, more or less. When in reality, it's a lot of people that work at suicide hotlines that literally keep people alive long enough to go and receive either inpatient or outpatient, services. And so if it wasn't for people working these lines and going and keeping people alive, they would literally never make it to a therapist at all, or any sort of psychiatrist or anything like that. And so I always found it to be incredibly weird how a lot of those that work in a clinical setting are outright hostile towards us a lot of the time. I've had some therapists go as far as to say, oh yeah, you guys don't really matter, it's us that does all the work. But it's really weird because a lot of the time I would go and I'd look at these people and I wouldn't really look at them as above or below me. They're not above or below, they're just different in that regard. And so I would catch a whole heap of hell for it, and it just wasn't really that great. There's definitely this air of, I have this degree, therefore I'm better than you, and I've never really cared for that too much. At the end of the day, I think we're all dealing with human souls. Like therapists have to deal with human souls on a regular, frontline workers have to deal with human souls on the regular. I think sometimes people forget that they're dealing with living, breathing human beings, which is awful. I don't really like that whatsoever, like a lot of people that are in crisis and stuff, and, a lot of these people that I've spoken to, they've never really asked for what happened to them. Like, they've never asked for the clinic to go and pull out the rug from under them. They never asked for life circumstance to go and just crush them straight through the floor. A lot of these people, when they would call, or a lot of these people when they would go and need assistance of some sort, they're doing it because they've been dealing with it for so fucking long that they can't carry it by themselves anymore, and they need a place to lay it down, more or less. And so I just never really, I think it's really disgusting how a lot of people that work in mental health on a clinical side have a tendency to look down on people based off of things like seniority, degrees that they have, type of work that you do, even. Or I've even seen some of them go as far as to literally sit there and say, well, you're not getting paid for it. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're still taking care of people. And so a lot of people have a tendency to get upset when I point this out. They're like, oh, well, you shouldn't be saying that about others. But the thing is I don't really understand why there is this huge, massive urge for people to go and try to protect other people that shit on others for simply not really being like them. And so it's a lot of food for thought, I think. At the end of the day, I feel that there should be pretty much everybody in this field working together to breed a very specific outcome, and that is the continued well being of these human beings that need the help. Nobody ever calls, as far as I'm aware at least, nobody has ever called and used the suicide hotline because they're bored. Most of these people are being crushed through the floor. Others are seriously mentally ill, like people that should be on meds, much like myself. And so I just really kind of hate how various people have a tendency to go and treat each other when we should all be working together to go and try to breed the best environment that we could possibly breed for these people to thrive and live their best life in. And so that's why it's kind of a raw wound for me. um, I have to admit I do struggle with this in therapy because I deal with so many therapists that are dickheads that eventually I have started to believe that they're all like that, even though I do have the exceptions kind of waggling around in front of me. And so I find that I have to be careful with it when I go and do my sessions because I have to beat down that method of thinking. The thought process of I've experienced it so much out of a single demographic, therefore they must all be like this, when it's very evident that, they're not. So it's been quite a journey. I would like to do it again someday, when my health improves and like when I get better and stuff. If I get better, I'm hoping I get better. I would love to go back and volunteer my time and service people like that again. I loved dealing with people that were just really struggling and stuff because it puts a smile on my face knowing that I have helped make them better, more or less. Help them help themselves and stuff. And I think that when you realize that, you just feel good. You see people just kind of sitting there and they're like, I'm glad I'm alive. I'm glad that you picked up, and it feels good. I mean, yeah, we're not going to be psychiatrists. We're not going to have the prestige of that. We're not going to have the prestige of like being a therapist and, having a sheet of paper on our wall. But it's still very rewarding work, I find. It's great to go and help people, and it's great to, give them an opportunity to not kill themselves and say, hey, things can get better. We just have to take steps, and I like that. It fills my cup at the end of the day, and I've always really kind of deeply appreciated it. I just really wish I had more of a knack than what I do for it, in all honesty. Like, I really wish that my stamina for it wasn't so short because the problem is when you go and have your own issues, right? Your own mental health issues. The battery to help people is very, very small, you know? And so when the battery is that small and stuff, you can't go as hard as you want to. You can't go as long as you want to. You have to take breaks because if you don't, shit starts to fall apart very, very quickly. And I unfortunately am an example of this. I really wish that I could do more than what I do, but I'm just kind of exhausted all the time. And then having to go and contend with, hospitals and other mental health workers all just kind of cannibalizing each other, that just wasn't really that great. And then you shake in a fair bit of classism, and it's just not really looking too good. I kind of, in many ways, hope that someday people that work in this field can understand that we don't really have time to go and chew on each other. We quite literally have people to help. And it really, I feel it's just kind of left kind of a bad taste in my mouth a little bit. That's just kind of how that is, more or less. But yeah, I hope that I was able to answer this question in a satisfactory manner. Well, question slash request. I am almost done with all of the questions that I have on this sheet of paper. I've been trying to bang them out a little bit every night when I have time to record. And I've been kind of focusing on my mental health and self care and, reading up on DID to see how I can help myself while I go and, wait for a specialist and stuff. Because apparently it's rare. Amazing. Well, not really. So, for those that actually came out and hung out tonight and stuff, I greatly appreciate it. As always, I appreciate your time and your effort. I love little comments that, you guys leave me and stuff, and I enjoy replying to y'all. So, thank you for your time and your effort, and as always, I hope you guys have a great night, and please, by all means, be good to yourselves and each other. Hi, guys, welcome back. This is going to be another installment of Mailbag, and today we are going to be talking about intent and what it means to have like good intent versus just seeking attention per se. So I kind of feel like most people don't really go in with good intentions anymore. I honestly, I was asked about it, somebody had gotten upset with me because most of the stuff that I do is relatively quiet. I don't really advertise it too much, especially with going home and taking care of people there, or going and feeding homeless folks, or, just going and doing things around the community. I don't really see a point to talking about it, in all honesty, with like family and friends and things like that, because it kind of feels like you're showboating past a certain point, and I don't really care for that. Like, I've always been a firm believer that if you believe in the work that you're doing, there will be no need to advertise it, because when you advertise it, when you constantly go and do something and you say, hey, I'm going and doing this, look how awesome I am, it undermines the point of doing it. So I don't really talk about it too much. I'll talk about it in therapy a little bit, but when it comes to the general public and various other circles, I don't really mention it at all, because I honestly feel that it's nobody's fucking business at that point. I don't really care for how people will go, and I see this a lot on YouTube. Oh, Jesus Christ, I see this so much on YouTube. How people will go and make a 10-minute video where they're like, this is what I did today, and it shows them scraping up a random homeless person off the street and being like, here's $200 in food and everything else. And I've always kind of viewed it as bad taste a fair bit. And a lot of people get upset because they were like, that's not bad taste. They're helping that person. But I feel like the intent behind it is probably impure. Like, for example, there's plenty of homeless people that I've gone and taken care of, and every time somebody shows up with a camera, I am very quick to shut that shit down, because I feel that it is incredibly disgusting to go and do that shit, more or less. So if you're going and you're just like filming it right and you're trying to glorify it and stuff, I feel like it severely undercuts, my intent that I'm going in with. And so I've never really had much respect for those that go in and they'll go in with like a huge film crew and everything else. And they'll be like, oh yeah, look at this and look at that and look at what I'm doing for this and that. Like, it doesn't really feel like you're going out of your way at that point to go and help people. It feels like, you're going out of your way to try to do a publicity stunt. And I've never really liked that too much. I've always felt that if you want to help people, just go and help people. If you want to feed people, then go and feed people. If you have to drag a camera with you, something is wrong. And so a lot of people have argued with me about it, because they have a they have a tendency to go and look up to these people. A lot of them are very prominent YouTubers and stuff, and I get really disgusted by it, I think, because they kind of fall for the illusion of, look at how awesome this person is, and, it just doesn't really feel like they're going in with proper intent. And so a lot of the time when I sit there and I look at it, I kind of just say to myself, oh, okay, this is, just what people do, I guess, and I've just never really understood, how deluded you have to be to literally go claim that you're helping a homeless person by giving them a couple $100 and then going and publishing a video that's probably going to get around 500,000 views that you're going to make a good amount of money off of. So when you go and you realize that they're going and doing things like this, it kind of, when you look at these homeless folks and, they're having cameras and shit shoved in their faces, it kind of feels like they're being exploited to a certain lesser extent because that specific creator is going to go and they're going to use this video to go and make money. And, it's also like a PR stunt on top of it, and it just doesn't really feel great. So I find that most people have a tendency to go and do things for show these days. I don't really, if I go and I see somebody that is literally going and they're like, look at, how I'm going and feeding this homeless person, or look how I'm going and, raising money for X, Y, and Z, I instantly stop, I pretty much instantly stop trusting any sort of motive that they have at that point, and a lot of the times I have a tendency to get the hell away from them. And so a lot of people frequently claim that I'm being rude by doing this, but I honestly don't think so. Some of the greatest things that I've ever seen in my life that people have done has been behind closed doors. They've never talked about it, they've never advertised it, they've literally never done anything to draw any sort of attention to themselves. And I've always respected that immensely because it makes a fat statement of, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to change this person's life, and nobody's going to know about it. Nobody's going to know what the hell I'm doing out here. I've always really kind of looked up to that immensely in some regards, and so I've always tried to uphold that as my standard. So I have a tendency to go and take care of people, and I just don't post about it. I don't even fucking mention it. Like I said, I'll talk about it in therapy every now and then, but it's not exceedingly common. So, I think that a lot of people these days, they kind of have problems with recognition or self-worth, so they'll go and do things like this, and then they'll just kind of sit there and say, oh, look at me, look at what I'm doing, and people will go and shower them with comments and stuff, or sometimes the video goes viral even, and it's a nice little ego boost, but I find that it is incredibly dishonest. I see it a lot in the religious communities as well, which I don't really care for, like they try to hog the limelight, I think, a fair bit, like especially with the news and stuff. They'll be like, oh, well, we're going out to go and help these people, and I kind of wish that we could move out of the age of doing everything for a camera and move into an age where everybody does it behind closed doors, because I feel like that the motivation would be, well, it would be a lot more honest, for starters, I feel like I would be able to trust people more as well, because, like, there would be really no kind of bullshit motivation to go and do it. You would do it just for the sake of doing it, which is how I've tried to live my life the last while. Like, I don't. It's really weird because people don't really do anything anymore to go and help each other. They do it because it does something for them. Like when you go and you realize that people are helping others for the sake of, their own self-gain, it just kind of feels like raw exploitation. And when you have raw exploitation like that, you just kind of say to yourself, hey, this just really isn't worth doing because it undermines the entire point. And so I kind of don't really like the YouTubers that go and do it and stuff, and then you have people that go and try to mimic them, and it's just a fucking nightmare in that regard, like, if you have to go and do something and kind of scream, look at how awesome I am, then something is seriously fucking wrong there. But no, it's been a problem for like the last while. Like, people ask me sometimes, why do you do certain things? I honestly have no reasoning. As bad as that fucking sounds, I have no reasoning. I don't expect to get anything out of it. I don't expect people to kiss my ass. I just don't expect anything. I go and I do it because I can. You know, and my family members kind of look at me a little bit weird sometimes when I sit there and say that, because a lot of my family is like, oh, hey, well, if you're going to do something, get something out of it. It's not always, when you go and do things, it's not always about getting a, what they would call a return on investment, right? A lot of the time you go and you do things because you can go and do it. You know, like you have the option to go and do it. But a lot of people these days, they don't really go and do it because they can do it. They go and do it because they kind of sit there and, you know, it'll either make them look good or it'll advance them somehow. Like, there's always some sort of ulterior motive with it, and I've never really been able to tolerate it well. So a lot of people get angry and upset, and they're like, you know, well, you know, you should talk about it more. There's no need. There's no need, there's no want. There really just isn't, jack shit to really be had out of it, and, you know, it's how it should be, you know? Like, I don't want to sit there, go and do something and be like, okay, I went ahead and I helped you with this, you owe me now. Like, I hate that mentality, that level of entitlement that people have a tendency to have these days. I've never really cared for it, and I don't really see it getting better. You know, like, I see this becoming like a long-standing problem. You know, I wish people would go out and do things with honest intentions. I think that I would find more human beings less sketchy if I felt that they were doing things honestly. You know. So, but that's kind of been my thought on it and stuff. A little bit of a shorter block, at, you know, a little under 11 minutes. So, thank you for coming out and stuff. This is probably going to be weaseled into a much larger video. So, but as always, thank you for coming out. I appreciate your time and your effort, and as always, be good to yourselves and each other. Yo dudes, what's going on? I am back with another section of Raimes mailbag, and this one's a little bit weird. The message reads, yo dog, why do your voice sound so weird and shiz? Well, thank you for the question. A little bit weird. Strange way of fucking writing it, I guess, but, you know, yo with like fucking 8 O's, you know. I'm assuming that he's referring to my monotone nature. And that's fair. Yeah, we can talk about that. I don't mind. So, with my monotone nature, it actually has a lot to do with the acoustics of my skull and how I actually hear things. So, when I talk, my skull has a very interesting way of perceiving it. In my skull, my voice actually sounds relatively normal. It has, like, certain colors and tones and everything else to it. However, when I go and say, like, I go and I record this, right? And I go back and I listen to it later, I find out exactly how much deeper my voice sounds and how flat it is. So eventually, when I had started noticing this, I was like, oh my god, there's something wrong with me. So I had actually chased it, thinking that there was something wrong. We had my ears checked and everything else. When we had my ears checked, we noticed that the bone structure and how my ears actually receive sound is very, very oddball, more or less. And so we were like, oh, okay, what's the effect of this? The effect is I hear things in a way different fashion. Most of the time, I hear things in a much more, I guess, bass heavy fashion and stuff. And so, a lot of the times, this kind of dictates how I listen to music and stuff, and it also dictates how I talk. Now, for those that are curious, yes, I always sound this flat. I mean, it doesn't sound flat to me, of course, but it sounds flat to everybody else. And I, over time, have just completely accepted it. I don't give a shit. It's just a part of who I am. Now, the cool thing is I can actually somewhat hear, like how everybody else hears me, if I go and take my hands, put them on the sides of my head, like I have a pair of fish flippers just poking out the sides of my skull. And so when I do that, I can hear what y'all hear, and it just sounds so fucking weird. But typically, when I don't do that, my voice actually has, well, to me at least, it has a lot more color to it. It's a lot lighter, it's a lot flittier, it's not as deep. It has very much so a very different resonance to it, and it just doesn't really bother me and stuff. A lot of people have a tendency to be unnerved at how I sound. I've had some people tell me that I sound like Seth Rogen. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. I've had other people ask me if I am depressed because I am flat. While I do have depression, it does not go and dictate how my voice sounds. I may sound a little bit more sluggish, but it doesn't really change my tone that much. I went back and did separate recordings, one where I was completely depressed, and then another one where I was literally in the prime of my life, and they don't really sound different. They both sound incredibly flat. So there's actually a couple of benefits to having a flat voice. I have learned to farm it to my advantage. And what I mean by that is I can literally sit there and I'll do deadpan humor. Like, literally. I had a waitress ask me one time, she's like, oh, well, these shorts are too small, does it make my ass look fat? And then I very subtly said, your ass doesn't look fat, it is fat. It's eating your underwear alive. And she had laughed so hard. Like, people actually, when I do comedy and it's deadpan, people actually love that shit. They absolutely, they absolutely love it. It's great. And so I also learned that the way that my vocals work has a tendency to fall in line with being neurodivergent as well. So, as far as I'm aware, this is completely normal for me. I don't view it as weird whatsoever. I can do all sorts of funny things with it. But yeah, I'm most likely going to sound like this for the rest of my life. And it's just a piece of me that I've just grown to accept and even cherish to a certain lesser extent. So that's going to be all for this particular segment. It's only 5 minutes long, but it's just such a weird, oddball question that I was like, yeah, let's go ahead and fucking clear the air and answer this, please. So, with that in mind, this is going to be followed up immediately with quite literally nothing. So, for those that have come out and given me your time and your energy, as always, I appreciate you. Until next time, please, by all means, take care of yourselves and each other. Hi guys, good evening. I am back with my last installment of Mailbag. This is the last recording, possibly, that I'm going to go and do for it. And the question was whether or not I feel that you can trust mental health clinics, as well as what my experience has been dealing with mental health clinics. Well, in all honesty, I personally don't think so. And the reason why I don't think so is because anytime I've been attached to a mental health clinic, everything has been very, very miserable. So, with my last mental health clinic that I was with them for years. Quite literally, I was completely wrapped in services and stuff. I became attached to them after I had a really bad ER stay. After I tried to unalive myself, more or less. The relationship I was in at the time was really, really bad, and so the mental and emotional manipulation and abuse kind of pushed me over the edge. And while I was in there, they were like, okay, well, you have to do something, more or less. And so they had referred me out to outpatient. And so I was like, okay, I had started the journey. I wasn't really sure what to expect. They had done intake and stuff. And so I did intake. I was seeing a nurse practitioner for medication, as well as attending therapy with my therapist, whom I still keep to this day, as part of my care team. And then I was also getting case management on top of it. So I feel that for a while my existence over at the clinic was a complete and utter wash. I would show up to the clinic a lot of the time, and they would be running behind a fair bit and stuff, and it wasn't really something I had paid too much attention to at first. Like, the nurse practitioners a lot of the time would be running behind because they had a lot of patients that they had to treat that were going and trying to get medication and everything. My case management life was non-existent, I don't think. It just really, for me, it was kind of one of those things where they would literally get a hold of me like once a year, and they'd be like, okay, well, what would you like to do? What are you doing here, kind of thing, and what services are you receiving? Are you interested in this? Are you interested in that? They would go over my diagnoses and stuff, and, we would just pretty much go from there, more or less. And the only stable element, I think, of my clinic life up until she left was my therapist. And so my therapist pretty much almost always had together and stuff. Every now and then she would have to call in sick, and, that's fine. Or sometimes she'd be having dramas at home, taking care of her family and stuff. That's fine. People need to be taken care of. It never really bothered me that much. My clinic life was okay, weirdly enough, until COVID had hit. When COVID hit, it was kind of an oddball experience because everybody's mental health issues were kind of going up and stuff, because the pandemic was kind of just tearing people up left and right. And that makes sense. I get that and stuff. And so my clinic was underneath a lot of stress. Before the pandemic, when I would show up and stuff, the clinic was already kind of running behind and stuff. They were kind of short-staffed, but they could manage it because the demand wasn't super high. But once the pandemic had hit, everything just kind of shot up to ludicrous amounts. So when the pandemic was first getting started, I was still going to the clinic and stuff, and we went from being I think it was 5 or 10 minutes late, all the way up to 45 minutes to an hour late. And so there was various discrepancies, I think, with this, because they'd be like, well, you need to show up on time. And then I would frequently state, I showed up 20 minutes early. I've been waiting out here. Normally I would be out of the clinic by 4:30. I was leaving at 6 o'clock at night a lot of the time. Management wasn't really going the way that it should in terms of medication management and stuff. I would go and explain my symptoms, and they'd be like, well, we want to try this med and this med. And a lot of the time, the side effects of the meds were actually worse than what we were trying to go and fix. And if I had raised these concerns, they would just kind of sit there and say, well, just give the meds some time. So I'd give it like 2 or 3 months a lot of the time, and nothing would happen. Often things would get worse. This is back before I knew that I had DID and stuff. And so they would just kind of say, well, it's just either schizophrenia or schizoaffective. And after talking to my friends that have both, they're like, Rain, that sounds more like DID. And at the time, I just kind of flaked it off because I was in denial about it. I kind of laughed hard, and then I didn't know that DID is actually very rare on top of it. And, I just didn't take it seriously, which hindsight's 2020, I probably should have. Actually, I definitely should have, thinking about it. And so halfway through the pandemic, everybody was moving over to going, like when things had really started spiking, everybody was moving over to telehealth, video chat, just pretty much anything that you could do from home, which was perfectly fine. It didn't really bother me at all. And so this is pretty much how I continued therapy, and then I would continue meds over the phone limitedly a lot of the time. Every now and then I would come in if they requested it, but I would always be wearing a mask and stuff. And so the pandemic more or less had kind of torn everything up, the staff rotation was rather insane. My clinic around this time, like they always had like a very, very low retention rate, I think, with the staff, because they were kind of they weren't kind of anything. They were overworked and underpaid for what they were doing. But with COVID, everything was just so compounded that it just wasn't really getting any better. So around this time, I think I had been through close to 5 case managers. I was basically getting a new one almost every year, and it just wasn't really that great. I never really knew if I was coming or going, and I had kind of dreaded going to the clinic. Like, the only pleasant part of going to the clinic up until that ended was me attending therapy, because it was nice to go and have somebody to talk to help me manage my mental health and stuff. And it was just really, really nice to get out of the house as well at the time, because I'm a little bit of a shut-in. I have rather intense anxiety when it comes to like large groups of people and stuff, so in many ways attending therapy was kind of like me flexing my social muscles a little bit, and then trying to get over the fear of quite literally leaving the house. So we were a little bit of ways through the pandemic and stuff. My therapist had ended one of our sessions saying that she was leaving the clinic, and I was given the options of either continuing therapy at the clinic with another therapist, ending therapy, or going to another clinic. And I had asked her at the time, hey, do you have plans to accept my insurance? I'd like to migrate with you. And she was like, yeah, I would like to, go and work on that, but it's going to be a while. So I said, okay. My life at the clinic had more or less started to fall apart at this point. I was kind of running around without any sort of support whatsoever. The transition period was actually really bad, but I believe that is covered in another video, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. There was a lot of things going on at the clinic beforehand, like before COVID hit. There should have been really big red flags, I think. So my therapist is a relatively busy woman. She has a lot of people that she takes care of, both in her personal life and in her professional life. A couple of my friends were seeing her for a while. She's very, very good at what she does. And so there would be a lot of things that were going on, I think, that would aggravate the hell out of me. A lot of the time she would go and she'd be taking care of her child, and I was completely okay with this, because when you go and you have children, they need to be cared for. That's what being a proper parent more or less entails. So she would be like, either I can't make it in today due to my child, or sometimes she would be sick. Communication at the clinic was so bad that she had gotten really sick 1 week, and nobody had bothered to say that therapy was just canceled for that week. So there was like a 2-week period where I was like really strung out, because I thought that I had been dumped as a patient, and then nobody could bother to tell me anything because there was a breakdown in communication. And so it was actually really, really stressful. And then I had a lot of other oddball occurrences that happened as well. And one of them was I had gotten a very long letter in the mail stating that my therapist was no longer in network, the entire clinic was no longer in network, and I didn't have access to meds and like all this other stuff. And so I had kind of freaked out a little bit because at the time I was using meds to manage myself before my medication load had started crushing me, more or less. And so I had to call the clinic, and they're like, when the clinic had picked up, the woman was actually quite rude about it. And she goes, well, yeah, everybody's calling today. And I said, well, hello, good afternoon, ma'am. I've got X, Y, and Z going on. Do I have to migrate clinics? Because I was trying to go and continue my care, and, I was like very heavily driven when it came to going and improving myself. And so they're like, no, it was a mistake that they had made up in Phoenix, and, all those letters went out. And so, I literally had to go and kind of calm my ass down a little bit, because it just wasn't really getting any better. The first serious red flag that I had noticed was not so much people being late. It was not the oddball occurrence with the coverage, essentially, with like the letters and stuff. It was when I had started getting bizarre phone calls from my case manager, as well as the clinical manager, asking if I wanted to swap off therapists. At the time, I was incredibly happy with it. Like my therapeutic life was the only thing at the clinic that was not malfunctioning, more or less. And so I sat there and I said, okay, I'm pretty happy with my therapist, guys. There's no need to call if there's any sort of issues. I'll go ahead and raise them myself. This is perfectly fine. And so every time she had missed a day, I would get a call. If she called in sick, I would get a call asking if I wanted to swap. If she had missed a day because she was going and taking care of her child, I would go and get a call, asking if I would want to swap. And this had carried way the hell into the pandemic as well, because she would call my phone and she'd be like, hi, Raimes, I'm having issues going on with, my child. I need to reschedule. I'm so sorry. And I would literally call her back and I'd be like, hey man, take care of your kid. Don't worry about it. Never apologize for anything. You don't owe me nothing. And that's pretty much where I stood on the entire thing. I had my first, spat of anger with management when my therapist had missed another day taking care of her kid. She was like, I have to go and take care of my kid. And as per usual, I was like, yeah, not a problem. Just handle your shit. I'm going to be here, still. And I had gotten a phone call, and the floor team at the time was like, are you satisfied with your therapist? And I wasn't familiar with this new team that they had calling me and stuff. I was used to dealing with specific people, and so it was kind of new. And I said, yeah, I'm happy with my therapist. You guys don't have to call me every time she goes and misses a day. She's going to get sick. She's going to have to take care of her child. All these things are fine. And they would actually get really upset with me about it, and I flat out made a blanket statement that if I had any issues, I would raise them. And I've continuously said this, and I always thought that it was bullshit how every single time Nicole had something come up, they would always try to shuttle me off to somebody else. And I didn't really agree with this at all. I figured that if it was bad enough, I would handle it myself, and it just wouldn't be an issue at that point. It would literally be a non-issue for the foreseeable future. Eventually, as previously stated, she went ahead and she left the clinic, and I had started the process of migrating, more or less. She had asked me to wait, because at the time my insurance was not yet accepted by her, so I said okay. And we were kind of just waiting for her to get hooked up, and she was very kind about it and said, okay, well, if you need anything, just call me. And so I never took her up on that offer. I always had like a deep-seated embarrassment, I think, of always asking for help. And then the year prior, before we started doing like phone appointments and everything else, she had to take me to the ER. Well, she didn't have to do anything. She took me to the ER because I was very suicidal, and she helped me get checked in. if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't really be sitting here, I don't think, because at that point in my life, things were just so damn bad, and it just was not getting better at all, so I just kind of sat there, and, she wound up taking me in. So when she had offered to go and state, hey, if you need anything, call me, here's my number, here's my post office box, I had never taken her up on it because I always felt like I was kind of intruding to a certain lesser extent. And so the entire time that I was waiting, I was more or less trying to get my shit together. She was going working on her stuff, I was going working on my stuff. I had received a new case manager named Zach, and he was actually a really cool dude. Love this man to death, ex-Marine, dedicated family man. Tons of kids, and we would just sit there and talk, and he would always want to talk to me and stuff, and I never really bothered going and trying to get close with him, even though he had wanted it and stuff. He wanted that camaraderie, but the problem that I had with it is, in the back of my mind, I would kind of sit there and say, hey, this guy's going to get swapped out so fast, and he would go and he would talk to me for like an hour every single time he would call every month, and he would ask me how I'm doing, and I'd say, hey, hon, I'm doing all right. And he was very accepting of the fact that, I'm trans and everything else, and we had sat there and talked about it, and he's like, well, I'm trying to do my best, and I'm excited, and I had given him the advice. I was like, I'm excited that you're excited that you want to go and help people. I get it. It's great, because I get that same excitement a lot of the time. It's like, yeah, let's do it, But I told him, I said, listen, man, you need to slow your roll. I was like, you're going to get worn out. You're not going to want anything to do with this. I was like, pace yourself. I know that you're busy, but try to slow your roll, And he said, okay. We talked for a little bit more. He had hung up. Following month, he announced that he was leaving the clinic, much like my therapist had announced and stuff. And with my therapist, I was told that we had 7 more sessions and that, she would be moving on to start her own practice, which, was fine. Lost her after 2, and then with Zach, he was like, I'm going to be here a couple more months, and he was gone after like a couple weeks, so he wanted to keep in touch, and I just kind of said, you know what, man, I said, that's fine, here's my number if you want it, that's perfectly okay, and he was just getting eaten alive by the clinic. Like, I hated that so much because I'd never seen anybody with that sort of enthusiasm wanting to go and care for other people. And yet he just went and he got stepped on the entire, duration of his time there, and it wasn't great. It sure as hell wasn't proper in any fashion. So I actually applauded this man very heavily, like I can definitely recognize people that genuinely care. And then I think with my therapist and stuff, I could tell that she was tired because she would sound, when she would do her calls, she would sound kind of worn out a little bit, but the workload that she probably had was most likely insane. So towards the end of my tenure with my old mental health clinic, I literally just watched everything fall apart. They were bought out by another company called La Frontera, and I noticed like staff rotation had kind of shot up through the roof and stuff and everything else, and it just wasn't really that great, like my old clinic used to be stocked with a ton of just amazing people. People that would remember my name often when I called and stuff. And by the time the buyout had happened, it was very clear. They'd made it very evident that people were just there to be processed, more or less. They had stopped being human souls and they had started being numbers. And so a lot of the people that I had gotten used to going and working with were gone. The first casualty was Steph, who is the ex-sister-in-law of a friend of mine. And then there was also Gladys up front. She was actually really cool, but I think she more retired than anything because she was incredibly old. And then all the cool case managers that I had were gone, and the clinic manager had been swapped out. I mean, it was just kind of a hell of a thing, and the buyout was just so caustic in terms of like how it was handled and the overall restructuring and stuff that it wasn't really a place that I felt like I really wanted to be at that point. It felt like there was really no soul, more or less. And a lot of people kind of go and they make the joke of, this is kind of a problem with mental health, oh, you're just a number. But when I would walk through the door, a lot of the time, it was just dead. And I don't mean dead as in like dead sound. I mean dead as in I kind of felt like I was walking into a morgue. Just, you could hear a fucking pin drop a lot of the time, and it was like cold and frigid. And, like a lot of the life had really just left the place, and you notice it when you walk in, I think. So I had started collecting my records and stuff, and a lot of the staff at the time had become rather abrasive. I knew that I wasn't going to stay at the clinic, and so when I was doing med management and stuff, a lot of the time, they would ask me because I told them that I would be migrating with my therapist, and they said, "Well, okay, how are you going to care for yourself?" And I would go over the plan. A lot of the time, they would not really have any sort of oh man, they would not really have any sort of understanding of what was going on because my therapist and I had actually spent a lot of time building structure and stuff and a plan in case, my mental health had gone out the window, and, something that we had worked on very closely and stuff because we were at our cores trying to keep me safe, more or less. And so I would go and I would explain to med management, hey, this is what's going on, X, Y, and Z. And a lot of the time they would just be very, very rude. A lot of them would go and make out of hand, well, not so much out of hand, out of pocket comments about needing to see a therapist that is there under their roof and stuff. And I would explain to them that I would be more interested in continuity of care and that, I'm just waiting. And so things had continued to snowball downhill. I was a couple of months away from being able to continue work with my therapist and stuff. I was still waiting on the insurance to go through and everything else. It was just this really hellish process. And so the clinic itself had kind of devolved and become very, very caustic at that point. If I was dealing with management, it was a fucking nightmare. If I was going and dealing with staff in the back, it was a fucking nightmare. It just was not really getting any better. The clinic had become almost exclusively for profit. There wasn't really much, if any, of a soul left. It wasn't really getting any better. I wasn't the only one that had noticed a change. They had started hemorrhaging therapists left and right. Like, people were just literally going, saying, fuck this place, and leaving. So I had requested my records, and they had denied to give them to me the first time. And I was like, well, I'm going to need these records at some point, so I had to go and fight for them a fair bit. And then when I did get them, they were incomplete. I started experiencing a bunch of surgeries on my legs. I had to have a bunch of bones cut and straightened because my joints are very arthritic. Started kicking off in my 30s, and with me like creeping up towards my 40s, those joints were just kind of degrading really fast. And we found out that I have autoimmune disease, so they're like, okay, these joints are bad, and then it looks like the inflammation is collapsing your vasculars in your legs as well, so I had to have a bunch of surgeries over the course of a year. And so they would ask me to come into the clinic, and I would sit there and say, hey, I can't do it, guys. My feet are in boots, more or less. Like, medically, I cannot go and, go up to the clinic because, one, I'm legally blind, I don't drive, and two, I don't really have a vehicle that can go and accommodate, huge-ass boots and stuff. My family at the time was giving me a hand with it, and, the truck just did not have enough space for, like, all these boots and shit. So they had eventually gotten mad with me, and I had started filing complaints, more or less, because the staff's demeanor was incredibly caustic at the time, if not outright hostile, and I didn't really like that too much. Granted, the staff, when I was getting ready to leave, weren't really in great shape anyways. A lot of them were incredibly homophobic, a lot of them were transphobic and stuff. One of them was so damn old that she still had the belief that being trans is still a psychosexual disorder, and, she was acting like it was the 80s, again, which really wasn't that great. And so I knew that I was on my way out the door, and so I had just decided that I was going to go and file some complaints. And it just, like I'd called and I was like, yes, I would like to file a complaint, and I would go and lodge the complaint, and then somebody would call me back a lot of the time. And, it would just go nowhere, more or less. So I kept filing complaints because it was getting kind of ridiculous. Hearing staff call people fags in the background really just was not that great, and I didn't care for it at all. You know, I was still waiting to go and see my therapist and stuff, and the process was very slow. She admitted that it was taking a lot longer than she expected, and she had gone and apologized about it. And I was like, oh, okay, you know, it's, you don't got to apologize. It's just I'm doing a status check, more or less, to try to smoothen out the entire experience. So eventually, my complaints had started to gain some steam. I was slowly but surely working my way up the food chain, so to speak, and I was trying to get everything resolved because I viewed it largely as a cultural issue with the culture at the place itself, and I realized that something drastic had to be done for things to actually improve, because you can't just do like a small complaint and then be like, oh, everything's fixed. You know, you have to make it have meaning and it has to stick. So I would go and get regional offices that would go and call back, and I would explain things, and then I would explain that they were getting mad that I didn't have a therapist in-house, and so I would go and get rather disparaging comments about her sometimes. Stupid shit like she wasn't really that great of a worker, or she wasn't the best that we had, you know, we do have better there, and it was just like this mass kind of, it felt like a smear past a certain point, trying to just go and discredit her as much as they could, and I just didn't really like that, because the entire time that I was with her at the clinic, my experience was positive. So I didn't really care for it that much, and so I felt like my complaints really weren't getting anywhere. And so eventually my insurance was following up with me pretty routinely, and they were like, hey, how you doing over at, CBIS? And I'd be like, I'm not really doing that great, I'm having all these issues. And so eventually I was transferred over to patient services, and I would go and file a formal complaint via my insurance company, which the company that they file the complaint against has to respond to that, or else, they lose certification for it. So I was kind of sitting there and I was like, all right, and we did the formal complaint, and I was told that somebody would be getting back to me. I said, okay. The person that had gotten back to me was actually rather awful. Like, he was a nasty dude. He had pointed out that it didn't really matter what had happened with my therapist. It didn't really matter how much that they were overworked, because at the end of the day, they could easily be replaced. This fucking floored me. And then to make matters worse, he had said the same thing about patients. More or less, that patients, there's always a ton of them, so it's not like they're really ever hurting for business, which, to be fair, he's not wrong, but the entire time I had to deal with him, there was just a lot of dehumanizing aspects going on. I didn't really like that, because I don't feel that people should ever go to work and then just have an experience that's so damn bad that they just kind of sit in their car and scream, And I think that when you have employees being treated bad like that, when you have people that run their mouths about them like that and stuff, that drips down to the patients, and that affects them as well. It's like a giant cycle, more or less. And so it wasn't really that great. My insurance had followed up with me, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to launch a bigger complaint, and we're going to ask La Frontera to actually go and respond to it. Well, when you go and you launch a bigger complaint, you have access to things like office notes, in addition to all of your records. I had requested my insurance had gotten a copy, and I had gotten a copy. I had requested pretty much the complete records from the clinic. They wound up being 1,300 pages, and then there was an additional 200 pages of office notes. And the office notes were actually pretty damning. So I went ahead and I was going through the office notes. It takes me a long time to read things, because I like to go and I just can't see a lot of this shit. And so I like to go and I like to take my time, because I like to understand what the fuck it is I'm reading. That's really all that boils down to and stuff. Like, I have magnifying glasses and stuff, but it still takes a minute, especially when you're seeing like 3 and 4 of everything, and it's just not really that great. So as I started going through the office notes, it was basically a bunch of bitching about me with messages between various providers and stuff. There was a fair bit of homophobic bullshit going on as well, but I was willing to overlook that because I know that a lot of people are just rather homophobic these days. But what had really stuck with me, I think, is there were alleged notes from my therapist talking about how she would like to pass me off to another therapist because she was not comfortable with me, and a whole smorgasbord of other things. And so this kind of struck a nerve with me because around this time I was going and pursuing therapy with my therapist, and so I try to be on good relations with everybody because I feel that when you have good relations with everybody, it breeds a superior quality of care. It doesn't matter if it's just therapy and stuff, you know, it could be like your doctor, your specialist, all that. You just want to go and, you know, be with people that you click with. So I had gone and, like, I'd noticed on the doctor's notes, sorry, I got doctor's notes on the brain. I gotta schedule appointments soon. I noticed that with the office notes, most of them were signed. And so during the COVID outbreak, when my therapist was working from home for the agency still, she would have to go and sign her documents. And so I looked at the signature on the quote-unquote office notes, and then I had looked at the signature that she was doing on her personal notes, and I noticed that the signature on the office notes was done in straight print, and it was really fucking ugly. And then her notes were equally as ugly because it's a digital signature, and all of them just look awful in that regard. But it was done in a very lovely cursive. So I just kind of sat there and I didn't really know what to think of it too much. It kind of put a lot of anxiety on me. And so when I was going and filing the complaint, my insurance was like, hey, you know, pretty much we're going to start looking at everybody. You know, is there anybody that you think that we shouldn't really worry about? And so I didn't really, at the time, know what to do with my therapist. I was like, you know, is this how she honestly feels about me? If so, then, you know, why did she even agree to have me for continuity of care? And I think it's kind of like a rather horrifying question that you have to ask yourself sometimes, you know? Like, you kind of sit there and you're like, oh, okay, well, you know, is this how they feel? And because I like to have good relations with the people that I work with, I view all of my providers as co-workers. You know, we are all working together to generate a certain outcome for me, the patient. And so I feel in order to achieve that, you have to work well together, because if you're constantly fighting, or if somebody's disgusted by another person, that result is going to be heavily hampered, I feel. So there was other things that I had to pay attention to as well. I found out that they were overdosing me on medication. I was supposed to be taking, oh man, like 900 a day, and they had me on double. At the time, they basically had me taking 2 300s in the morning, 2 300s in the afternoon, and then 2 300s at night. And it just wasn't really that great. It turns out that it actually gave me pulmonary issues. I ended up in the ER and stuff because it was dropping my blood pressure so low that my heart just decided to say, oh hey, there's next to no blood pressure, everything's super low, I'm just gonna stop working now, more or less. And so I had kind of struggled with it, you know, I was like in and out of the ER a fair bit. They couldn't figure out what was going on. My pulmonaries didn't actually start recovering until somebody at the ER was like, yeah, you know, you have an insane load of quintiapine inside you. You know, we're going to have to go and ask you to cold turkey it. The withdrawals are going to be really rough. And we're going to have to monitor you for seizures and a couple of other things. And so I had stopped quintiapine cold turkey, which is like the roughest fucking experience of my life. But in the notes, it was simply sitting there saying, you know, give extra Seroquel, more or less, and don't worry about it. You know, they have BPD, it helps keep them docile for everybody else. And so I just kind of looked at it, and I was reading through a lot of the notes and stuff, and I'd kind of shit my pants. And so at the time, the person I was dating, I was like going and I would be like, "Hun, am I losing my damn mind over this?" And I would ask them to read it, and they were completely horrified. They were like, "Oh God, what is this?" And I said, "Apparently it's the office notes. We're going through it to figure out who needs to get a pitchfork in the ass and who shouldn't." And so she had made the same observation that I had made about the signatures on the notes that were claiming to be my therapist versus the signatures that my therapist was going and putting digitally on her notes while she was working from home. And she would sit there and say, "Hon, this doesn't really add up too much. These are not the same," but we had noticed at the time that the writing style was very, very similar to the writing style of the clinical manager that had made those notes. And so when it came down to holding people accountable for things, it was like, okay, well, this paperwork looks like it's forged. The medication has been overprescribed, more or less. This could have killed me. And so the company's response was literally to go and say, "Well, we never did that." "Well, obviously you did. The notes are right there." And then the woman who was doing the original notes regarding my therapist no longer worked for the company. So it was just kind of a hell of a thing. And so eventually I had gotten up to the point where I had to get up and go bat for my therapist, more or less, because I had an extreme amount of anxiety towards her because, I was like, okay, well, if this is how you feel, then we probably shouldn't really be working together. I'd just kind of like to send you on your way. It's going to suck, but, that's how that is. It was more of a thing of... It was so much anxiety trying to figure out what was an actual lie that the entire experience was just shot to hell. And so I went through this phase where I was like, okay, we're going to go through and we're going to ask a bunch of questions. I had brought it up to her. I had brought everything up to her, and I was like, "Were you aware that I was being overdosed? Did you say this? Did you say that? Were you trying to pass me off to somebody else? Why do I make you uncomfortable?" That session just wasn't really great for her, because it was just kind of dropped in her lap. And she was more or less forced to contend with it because I just kind of wanted answers. I didn't like feeling like I was being lied to, and so the best thing to do is to literally go and confront it. Something that I don't really typically do with my providers. We had straightened it out, and I'd gotten back with my insurance company, and they were like, "Okay, yeah, this is going to get a lot worse." And so we've been chasing it the last while, and we're finding all kinds of things that are lies and stuff. And then the medication overdose, they were like, "Well, that's okay because, Seroquel has a high tolerance, and the thing is it doesn't really have a very high tolerance on me." So in terms of going and asking the question, "Hey, do you think that, you can trust mental health clinics?" No. Oh, no, absolutely not. It's really surreal when I, as a patient, have to go and stand up for my therapist because we realized at that time that they were pretty much lying about everything. And so we found out later that there was a bunch of documents that had lies on them. We had to hold them accountable for that. There was a bunch of falsified signatures. That wasn't really that great. I'm pretty sure that's a pretty heavy-handed offense, which, we're still in the process of going and sorting through that. And then there was overprescribed medication, which could have very easily killed me and almost succeeded in doing so. I mean, it just wasn't really that great. And then you have the collateral damage of it, where when I was going and reading the office notes, I started building distrust towards my therapist. And then later it was found out that I had other friends that would go and they would notice the same damn thing in their complaints, except they had different therapists. So apparently this was like a common practice. The woman that was previously running the clinic had a very nasty habit of lying and things like that. And it was just really, really fucking awful. And all it did was damage a shit ton of people. And so a lot of people have a tendency to sit there and say, "Well, businesses make mistakes and stuff," but there's a difference between making a basic clerical error versus going as far as to tell people that, "Hey, this person said this, and then signing off on it, like trying to sign off on it as them, and then go from there. So in many ways, going to the clinic has damaged the relationship that I have with my therapist very, very heavily. Now I second guess her, and I'm going to have to go and work through that. I mean, I did ask her, I was like, hey, is any of this true? And she was like, no, but it was like this weird kind of shocked, drawn out no. And so I think as a patient, I'm trying to go and give her my trust, but it's really just one of those things where you kind of struggle with it because you read things like this, you have a knee-jerk reaction, and so you confront it, and then you go and you second-guess it because it's like, are they lying to go and cover the room? And so what I had chosen to do is I had chose to give her the benefit of the doubt, which I will be talking with her about at some point. Well, chances are by the time this video hits, because it's slated for way later, I'm probably already going to have that conversation with her, I think. But I had chosen to believe the individual over the company because the company has a habit of lying, and when it came down to holding people accountable, when my insurance had asked me, hey, what about this person, this person, this person, I could literally sit there and say, no, I don't really think, that they're a problem and stuff because the offense is so bad that they would typically start stripping licenses at that point. And so I had stuck to my guns with it and stuff, and I was like, okay, well, if this is going to get better, we need to be vocal about it. I need to do a little bit of a better job standing up for myself, which anybody that knows me knows that I just really struggle with it. Like, I literally have an altar that literally is nothing but me standing up for myself because apparently I was needing that at some point and it wasn't happening, so my brain decided to manufacture somebody to handle that. But yeah, I am not very likely going to ever trust a clinic again. I find them to be not very well organized, incredibly seedy. They treat patients like shit. They treat providers like shit. It is more trouble than what it's worth. Being overdosed on Seroquel was fucking awful. I learned that I have permanent nerve dysfunction because of it in regards to like my pulmonaries and stuff. It just is really, really bad in that regard. And so I just never really... I never really looked back on it, I don't think. I think where I'm at in my life currently is trying to wrap up the rest of it. Because, we've been kind of seizing licenses left and right, more or less, for the amount of malpractice that's been going on in various respects. And then I've been trying to figure out more or less how to go and patch things up with my therapist, because for a while I was always a very staunch supporter of everything that she did. It's like in regards to being sick, taking days off, taking care of your kids, all that stuff. And so for me, it was like, okay, well, how do we know that this person is actually a good person? And so I think sometimes you have to go and throw caution to the wind. At the end of the day, we only really know each other in that room for like an hour a day. We talk about my problems and stuff and everything else, but we don't know each other outside of that, which is fine. But to a certain lesser extent, when the relationship is like that, when it's just professional like that, it leaves a lot of room for doubt, So it's something that I'm going to have to tackle at some point, because on one end I realize a lot of therapists these days have like really, really bad, they actually have bad reputations. Mental health in general these days actually has a really bad reputation. But I would like to go and give her the benefit of the doubt, because I realize that this company is doing some truly awful shit, lying about truly awful shit, and almost getting me killed as an end result of it. So I feel that part of mental maturity is realizing that some of it is not always going to be black and white. It's not always going to be yes or no. There's going to be a lot of nuance there, and sometimes you're going to go and have to pick through things to be able to understand what's going on, because it's not going to be yes or no. You're going to have to eventually be like, okay, where's the why, more or less. And so that's pretty much been my experience at the clinic. There's a lot more to it, but with my memory being really, really bad, I'm pretty sure that my alters remember a fair bit as well, because it's not always me that's behind the wheel and stuff, as I am very, very quickly learning. But I wouldn't really... What I would do if you had started work over at a clinic is I would go and monitor it very heavily. And if there were any, like, super large red flags like I was having to encounter right off the bat, then I would literally go and I would do something about it pretty quick. Like, don't be like me and wait until you're so far down the pike that you're kind of like, oh, okay, you know, now it's just really bad and there's multiple people involved. Nail it early and stuff. The final nail in the coffin actually came probably about a month ago, and that was them cutting support for me entirely. I was still recovering from a bunch of vascular surgery and stuff, and so they had asked me, you know, hey, what are you doing? More or less. And I would sit there and say, I'm at home healing. And finally, they had be like, well, you know, we're providing this for you and that for you. And like, they had this long list of shit that they claimed that they were providing, but the reality is they weren't really providing much of anything. You know, I wasn't getting medication. You know, my therapy is outsourced now to a private practice. You know, I wasn't getting any of the other benefits, you know, that they were giving other people and stuff, because I wasn't ready for it yet, you know. And so they had asked me if I felt that my treatment was complete. I said no. They said, well, we're going to go ahead and terminate you as a patient because you're not doing anything. And it was just incredibly rude, because what's the point of asking me if my treatment is over if... what's the point of asking me if my treatment is over if you're just going to terminate me anyways? It doesn't really make much sense at that point. So, long story short, nope, I will never trust clinics again. I gotta go and build trust with my therapist. I got tons of shit that I gotta tackle her. No, I am not going to tackle her. I've got a lot of stuff that I gotta go and tackle with her. I've gotta learn to build that trust up again. I've gotta go and wrap up the rest of the complaint and stuff, you know, the rest of the case, get that out the door. You know, like, the damage that they have done is so damn heavy that I feel like I'm going to be mopping it up for a while, and it's really just not that great. So, if you're going to go and, you know, participate in a clinic and stuff, keep your records close by, keep an eye on everybody, keep an eye on everything. If shit looks like it's going to be awful relatively early on, don't be afraid of leaving. If your therapist is, like, leaving and you want to pursue continuity of care, as long as you guys got along well, you know, I don't really see a problem with that. Don't sit there and have your clinic tell you, no, you can't do it. They legally are not allowed to do that. We have laws that specifically target shit like that. So don't ever sit there and say, hey, you know, I'm not allowed to do this. You know your rights as a patient, know what you can do and what you can't do. Because clinics can and will outright lie to you a lot of the time. So, for those that came out and stuck around and stuff, I'm sorry if this entry seems a little bit haphazard. I didn't mean for it to be, but, you know, it is what it is. I can be relatively scatterbrained sometimes, and I still have that speech impediment, as usual. But I wanted to thank everybody for coming out. These videos are almost done! And, as always, be good to yourselves and each other. Till next time, take care. Hey guys, this is going to be the last segment that I do because this is the last question that I have actually been asked. So We are finally down at the bottom of the sheet of paper. I've been working really hard on this for like the last week, just going, recording it, making all these videos. My poor Mac has been rendering nonstop, just trying to get these suckers out the door. So, the last question comes straight from the Discord, and it is, what is it like trying to be an ally and doing advocacy work? That's rough. It's not bad. It's just rough. Truth be told, it's hard. It's not easy. You're gonna run into a lot of issues. You're gonna run into issues where people view you as being performative if you're not lining up with what they think you should be. You're going to be running into issues where if you stand up for people, they may come back and bite the hell out of you because they're experiencing damage. You're gonna run into all kinds of crap. You're gonna run into issues where you go and advocate for people, or you go and try to be an ally to people, and they'll get mad and say, "Fuck you, we don't need you," all sorts of stuff. So to give you examples of this, um, basically for the last while, I've been advocating for mental health for those that are practitioners as well as patients because I view it as a dual issue. So we're going to go ahead and talk about a situation that I had. I went to IFAD a while back, and basically what it is a small convention in Arizona that you can actually go to. Happens once a year, and they literally have a bunch of people that show up and like to do a bunch of guest speaking, and then there's like a lot of people that go and like to listen, and there's just all kinds of good stuff that happens at IFAD when it happens. So I had gone not that long ago, and I literally was just there to talk about the disparity between practitioners, patients, and corporations, and how corporations have a tendency to meddle in the care of patients as well as the method of practitioners, more or less. So I had gone up and I had started, it was my turn to speak, essentially. So I shuffled my fat little ass up there and I had started explaining basically what was going on for therapists and patients. And I was like, hey, listen, in all honesty, patients need to be treated well. This much is true, but the amount of wear and tear that practitioners go and take is truly insane. I had talked about my experience over at my old clinic, and then I had spoken about the challenges that I face in therapy, and then like trying to stand up for my therapist more or less when the company was going and doing skeezy shit. Most notably, lying about things that she had said, and her almost getting roasted as an end result of that. So I went ahead and I was like, okay, well, this is my experience and stuff. This is how I feel that we can handle it. In all honesty, I feel that most therapists are grossly underpaid by insurance companies. They need to have more power in terms of like naming their rates and everything else. And I think that experience should go and factor into that as well. That way those that have been doing it for a while get paid very reasonably well and stuff. And the idea behind this was with people getting paid reasonably well, they won't be forced to take on as many patients. This, in result, should reduce stress and then encourage more people to actually come into the demographic, more or less, boosting those that actually want to be mental health care workers. And so when I had brought this up, there was actually a heckler in the crowd, literally sitting there saying, nobody gives a shit. We don't need you. We don't want you. The only thing we want is your money. Which, to be fair, like, I get that. It's a business and stuff. But it was really weird, like, when I was sitting there trying to advocate for mental health workers and stuff, both those that are paid and those that aren't, and to have somebody in the crowd literally just kind of try to attack me as a patient. Because at that point, I had already admitted, hey, I'm a patient, and, like, I also go and volunteer on the side. It's very interesting to see both ways of the door swinging, more or less. And so he was actually incredibly upset about it. It turns out that this particular gentleman is incredibly well known because he frequently encourages medically assisted suicide to patients that he deems are, quote, quote, too far beyond help. Everybody knows who the hell this guy is. Nobody really likes him too much. he's a bit of an asshole, but I tried to sit there and be cool about it because, everybody deserves representation and stuff. And so I had just kind of calmly sat there and I tried to explain to him, hey man, everybody deserves to thrive and stuff. It's not just patients that deserve to thrive. It is also very much so practitioners. They're, overstressed, overworked. We have issues and we need to start tackling them because if we don't, it's not going to get better. The first step to solving the issue is admitting that the issue exists. And so when you have practitioners that are very inconsiderate like this and stuff and, just going and showing their ass to the world, it really makes it kind of hard to do much of anything. But I was very calm about it. And I was like, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but, we need to push forward because there's a better future that's very much so possible. But we can't achieve that if we don't work together. Like patients need to go and advocate for their providers. That way their providers can go and be treated better. And theoretically, it should be a cycle where things progressively improve. You have like one demographic pushing to help the other demographic goes and treats or gets treated better, gets paid more, less stress, higher quality care. And he just wasn't really having it. Dude proceeded to say that it didn't matter because all of us were quite literally easy to replace. And apparently he believed that nobody could stand me. And so at the time I was just kind of like standing there. And I had gone and I've been carrying my records from my old clinic with me and just reading over them because I have an ongoing case going on with it. And it had hit a nerve so hard because like I really get tired of a lot of the mental health industry sitting there saying, well, nobody cares, we're overworked, we're underpaid, nobody gives a shit about you. And so it had pinched a nerve with me so hard that I had pulled out my records and I pretty much have all of them paper clipped. So I have some sections that have bigger clips than others, but if I want to quick reference something, I just pull that particular paper clip, pull that section out, and then start going over it. And so I had just quietly looked at him, and I said, I'm fully aware that, people don't really have a very high opinion of me, however, I am trying. I don't stand here today and do this for your approval. I stand here and I do it because what's going on is wrong. Clinics lying about providers is wrong. Providers being underpaid is wrong. Providers going and not having time with their families is wrong. Providers being worked into the ground is wrong. I'm fully aware of how most people feel about me, and I said I've got a stack of paper right here that pretty much shows me how little they think of me, and I had started thumbing through it. And I had jumped to the section with my therapeutic life, and I said, in all honesty, I don't really know who to believe anymore when I read things like this. And I had asked to project the paper onto the screen and stuff using my phone's camera, and I was pretty much showing everybody, hey, this is what I'm contending with. And I had openly admitted to him that these comments are widely regarded as lies, more or less, after a little bit of investigating, but I still had to go and read this, and then there was other providers that just really weren't that enthused with me. And so I had pointed out that I'm still human, that I still bleed and stuff, and that when I read negative stuff like this, it very much so has an impact on me. And so I had very bluntly asked him. I was like, hey, I am choosing to give her the benefit of the doubt instead of going and wrapping her up in all this bullshit. Would you feel better if I just said nothing to her, said to hell with it, and then decided to just go and rake her through the mud and stuff, would that be fair? And he's like, well, no, that's not okay. And I said, well, there's so many therapists. Obviously, you guys are just a number. You can be replaced. And he's like, well, no, that's not fair at all. And so I had pointed out that there was a double standard there. And I had asked him, I was like, well, why is it not fair? And he had blatantly stated, he goes, well, that's a person that's working hard and everything else. And I said, well, are you sure you just, don't want me to sit there, have everything pulled and everything else? I was like, why is it okay for patients why is it okay to discharge patients, but it's not okay to, go after mental health workers? Is it because it's one of your own or what? And so I had made the point that, we need to stick human beings first and not companies. I didn't really appreciate anything of what he was saying and stuff, and I was like, I understand that most of y'all are miserable these days, but, how would you feel if I just never took you into consideration, never thought about you, just did, my damnedest essentially to go and wreck you? And he had actually gotten really quiet, and I kind of felt like this wave of depression, I think, hitting me, because I was literally just kind of sitting there saying to myself, this is not okay. And I think it's really shitty because sometimes you'll want to go and stand up for people, right? You'll want to sit there and you'll want to stand up for them because you realize that they have things bad, that they deserve better. And sometimes even when you go to stand up for people, or even like a specific demographic, crap like this will happen. And I had explained to him in the middle of this immense wave of depression, I was getting ready to, I found out later that I was getting ready to go and shift on top of it because I have a tendency to get nauseous and stuff, and I was just kind of sitting there and I was trying to carry this conversation and it wasn't really getting any better. And I was trying to explain to this dude, hey, I'm recognizing, you as a human being, all of you guys as human beings instead of something to be exploited. And it just wasn't really happening. It's like, it's really, really hard to sit there and try to juggle the various baggages of an industry while you go and try to advocate for people that you realize need it quite a bit, because a lot of people are overworked, underpaid. It's not fair that they have to be exposed to violence and things like that. There's just a lot of problems, and instead of sitting down and bitching about it, or sitting down and saying, well, it's not my problem, I'm just a patient, let's go ahead, shine some light on it, and do some constructive thinking on how to solve it. And so the guy's comments had stuck with me. When I was done doing my thing, a lot of people had applauded and stuff, and I wasn't even really proud of it at that point. I was just kind of like, God damn, that fucking hit hard, And other therapists that were in the room and stuff, aside from the one that was attacking me, would walk up and they would shake my hand. I was trying to get out of the room. I wasn't really feeling well. I was incredibly nauseous at the time, and my head was just kind of swimming around. And it really, it had hit me so hard that I sat there and I was on my way to the bathroom. And this guy just was not having it. And so I had started to choke a fair bit, because everything just felt really, really heavy. And this guy was pretty much going and being on his shit still. And I had a friend of mine going and following me who had brought me up to the summit, and he was like, hey man, are you okay? And I was like, I'm feeling incredibly sick. Meanwhile, asshole A was literally going and chasing me down, and he was like, I suppose that you love all of your providers and all this other stuff, and you're probably fucking them. And it was just so fucking rude, and I was just kind of sitting there, and he told me that I was going to accomplish nothing, which that turned out to be a lie. I definitely accomplished shit. But he said that I wasn't going to get very far with it, and that it was very evident that I was just apparently trying to get down people's pants. Fun fact, I'm asex. I don't really enjoy sex that much. I'll have it if need be, but I can go my entire fucking life without it. I'm actually kind of sex repulsed to a certain lesser extent. So I had flat out told him, he had made the comment that, he's like, well, you can't just hunt down everybody. That's not right. Companies have to thrive. And I just kind of sat there and I said, you don't hunt them down because they wronged you. You hunt them down because what they're doing is wrong. And he had shut up really fast. I had made my way to the bathroom, and my whole head was just kind of spinning to a certain extent. And my friend was in tow, and he was like, hey, are you doing all right? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? And I said, I'm not really feeling too good. I had gotten into the stall, vomited a couple of times, passed out, and then I found out later that when I had woken up, when he was sitting there going, and he's like, hey, are you alright? Apparently one of my alters had kind of taken over and stuff, and I don't have any memory of it, per usual. And so it's just really, really shitty because it's really weird because you go and you try to uphold like a certain standard, I think, and you're like, hey, things got to get better. And you realize that, you want to try to give people the best and stuff, but when you do, there's always this ulterior motive, or there's always a heckler, somebody that just wants to be an asshole, and it's really weird because people automatically assume that when you go and you stand up for people, or if you go and bring a problem to light and you don't really stand to gain anything from it, that there must be some other kind of reasoning behind it. And it's just very, very obnoxious, I think, because I'm kind of at the point with things where it's like I'm just kind of sick and tired of watching the shit. Like I'm sick and tired of watching people be worked through the floor, and I'm kind of sick and tired of a lot of the patients going and having to bear the weight of it. So, yeah, it was just really, really awful and stuff. And from what I understand, everybody was very satisfied with everything, and they felt that, like, I was going and asking top tier questions. And I personally don't really feel that they were top tier. It was just shit that was weighing on my brain, more or less. But it was incredibly rough, I think, because when you go and you stand up for people, a lot of the times they automatically assume that, you want something, and the hilarity of it, if you could really call it that, is, it's, I'm not looking to gain anything out of it. I just kind of want to create a better future. I want a future where people can go and work and get paid and not have to work as hard and not be as stressed, and, like, I have certain things that I would like to see. But the entire experience left a bad taste in my mouth, per se. I guess this is kind of one instance of what being an ally is like. You're going to have some people that cheer for you. You're going to have some people that are incredibly pissed with you. It's not always going to be peaches and cream, so to speak. So I've been an ally for others as well, but this is kind of my more mental or my more mental health related. God damn it. This is one of my more recent endeavors, I think, and it's one that sticks with me the most because I like standing up for folks in the mental health community because I feel like they deserve it. Yes, there's a lot of cancerous shit that kind of flops around in here, but I still feel that various people with various diagnoses go and deserve it because a lot of the time they're not treated very well, and I kind of get tired of seeing that too. There's just a lot that kind of goes into it, so I go and I try to represent as much as I can. And it doesn't really matter to me, I think, if people feel that they need it or not. When you go and you recognize a problem, it doesn't matter if everybody really, agrees with you in its entirety. It just matters that you're willing to go and recognize it, saying, hey, we need a change, and then trying to go from there, more or less. So, but yeah, it gets rough sometimes. You're going to have people that attack you. You're going to have people that talk shit about you. You're going to have some people that say nothing is wrong. You're going to have other people that say that you're not doing enough. There's just really, when it comes down to it, it can be, going and doing things like this can be incredibly hostile at times. You're going to run across a lot of apathy. And that's pretty shitty as well, because I feel like apathy just doesn't really have any sort of place in a functional society. But, that's pretty much what my last experience with that was like, more or less. It just left a lot to be desired, I think. Wasn't really... A lot of people took it seriously, but a lot of people were also like, nobody gives a shit about us, we're working all the time, and we've got these crazy-ass patients and everything else. And what a lot of people don't realize is, yes, a lot of us do listen. We go and we listen to literally every little thing that you have to say, but the problem is a lot of us don't really know how to go about solving it, which is a big problem in its own right. So you try to have to cobble together a solution, more or less. But I just I try to show people the respect that they deserve and stuff, but I find that a lot of the time people are incredibly erosive, and it really just kind of taxes my soul, I think. And you do get tired after a while. So it's not an easy road to go and walk. A lot of the time you're going to struggle immensely and stuff. that's pretty much just how that is. You know, you're gonna struggle a fair bit, you're gonna hurt a fair bit, but anything I've always felt that anything worth doing has always sucked to a certain lesser degree. It's never been an easy road, and if it is an easy road, it's probably not worth doing. So, but yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on it and stuff. Final entry in the series, in the books. Good stuff. Amazing. So, this is pretty much going to conclude this entire line of videos. For those that have come out and stuff, as always, I appreciate your time and your effort. I know that these have been kind of long-winded, but people were like, why don't you answer our questions? And it's like, alright dudes, we'll go ahead and do this. We'll answer your questions and stuff. But for those that came out and stuff, you know, I hope that you enjoyed your time here at least. I greatly appreciate everything you guys do for me and stuff. And as always, until next time, by all means, please, be good to yourselves and each other.
Jill? Is that you, Jill?
Oh, Chris, you're alive!
Of course. Damn it, we're in quite a predicament, Jill.
I know, Chris. Anyway, I have to open this room. It doesn't work. Well, Chris, I'll be sure to come back and help you soon. Will you wait here?
Thanks. I'll be waiting here for you.
Let's get going. Wesker,
You did a fine job, Barry.
just as I thought.
I think you should stay away from Barry, Jim. I hear that his wife and 2 daughters will be in danger if he doesn't do everything I tell him to.
So cruel.
Well, you don't have to worry about anything, because you'll be free from this I must complete my mission, as ordered by Umbrella. Barry, go up on the ground and wait there.
Barry!
Barry's such a fool. He'll be under the control of Umbrella forever.
How come both Umbrella and you can intimidate him by taking his family as hostages?
Umbrella? Well, I intimidated him, but it had nothing to do with Umbrella. I just used him for my personal purposes, though both you and Barry seem to think I was following orders from Umbrella.
So you're planning something else?
If you succeeded in developing the world's most powerful biological weapon, what would you do? What if you were in charge?
You must stop this now.
You're a brave girl. But if I were you, I wouldn't give up such a big discovery. You guys are idiots. No one understands its real value.
So, you're going to steal all the research?
Better yet, I'm going to show you the tyrant.
Oh! Barry!
Sorry, Jill.
How is your family?
I was listening to what you and Wesker were talking about. I wish I realized it earlier. I thought it must have something to do with Umbrella, you know. So it's all been masterminded by him.
But it's good that you know that now. Anyway, let's get out of this house first.
Jill,
Yes, what?
do you have any idea what Wesker was going to show you at the back of this place?
Well, he was talking about the world's most powerful biological weapon, called Tyrant or something, I think.
Do you think we could see Tyrant now?
Barry, you're so optimistic.
It would look bad for stars if we let such a dangerous creature run loose.
Maybe you're right. Let's go then. Can a creature like this really be the ultimate biological weapon?
Really? Wesker is a crazy man.
Tyrant is not completely developed.
But we can't let it live. That must be the computer for monitoring this creature. Damn you!
Control what it does. Let's get going. What happened to Wesker?
went up for me. Even today, my oldest daughter. I'm sorry.
Don't worry about that. I know you must still be